Hello and welcome to World News here on TVP World. I'm Marie Cato. Belgium says the EU should hold off making a decision on the use of Russian frozen assets as it could endanger the latest peace talks on the war in Ukraine. Brussels remains the biggest hurdle for the European Union to releasing the 140 billion euros of the Russian assets that were put on ice in Belgian banks since the start of the war. Our correspondent Kazimierz Wysiak is in the Belgian capital and has the latest.
Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever has reportedly sent a letter to the European Commission saying that using Russian frozen assets and giving them to Ukraine right now in the middle of the peace process, the negotiations between Ukraine, the United States and Russia could potentially hinder that process. The Belgian Prime Minister does not give much reasoning in the letter reportedly seen by the Financial Times. We can only assume that he means that providing Ukraine with such a big financial boost at this time would potentially make Ukraine inclined to drop the peace process for now and focus instead on retaking as much land as possible from the Russian invaders.
Hastily moving forward on the proposed reparations loan scheme would have as a collateral damage that we as EU are effectively preventing reaching an eventual peace deal.
However, the big question here is how genuine are the words of the Belgian Prime Minister, as it is Brussels which remains the biggest hurdle for the European Union to use these Russian frozen assets. The biggest hurdle because most of these frozen assets, about 140 billion euro of them, are stored in Belgian banks, for example in Euroclear here in the Belgian capital. And Belgium is voicing concerns that if the EU were to use these assets, then perhaps in the future Russia could come knocking, asking for legal compensation. The EU is doing its best to convince Belgium that it will have its back in such a case. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen earlier this week said that the Commission is ready to present the legal text on the use of these frozen assets, and we are still waiting for that text to be unveiled. The EU hopes to convince Belgium as soon as possible, as Ukraine could really use such a financial boost. From Brussels, Kazimierz Wysiak, TVP World.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has met with Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó is also part of the delegation and has met with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. The Hungarian delegation traveled to Moscow to discuss crude and gas supplies for Hungary and peace efforts in Ukraine. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán said he is heading to Moscow to ensure that Hungary's energy supply is secured for the winter and the next year. When asked if peace efforts in Ukraine would also be on the agenda, Orbán said, "We can hardly avoid that." The Prime Minister has maintained close relations with Moscow despite the war in neighboring Ukraine, and Hungary is still largely reliant on Russian energy, despite European Union efforts to cut its dependence. Vladimir Putin has doubled down on his demands for Ukrainian territory. As peace efforts intensify, the Russian leader told reporters that he would only be ready to end the war in Ukraine if Kyiv withdraws from the entire Donbass and hands the territory it controls there to Russia.
Putin has said that if Ukraine does not cede the eastern industrial territories of Donetsk and Luhansk, which together make up what's called the Donbass, Russia will continue fighting and seize them with force. Moscow has been trying to capture that area since 2014 and has suffered significant losses for each push forward since. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who spoke following Putin's remarks, said that Russia scorned efforts to end the war. Next week, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will travel to Moscow to continue negotiating with Russian officials. Witkoff might be joined in Russia by Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, according to the White House.
Investigators from the Ukrainian National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office are reported to have launched a search into Andriy Yermak's home, head of the president's office. The search comes at a precarious moment for President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, under pressure from the United States to accept a peace deal seen as favoring Russia. Our correspondent Oz Chatterjee is in Kyiv and has more.
Investigators from Ukraine's National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office have raided the properties of Zelensky's Chief of Staff, Andriy Yermak. This was confirmed on Friday by Andriy Yermak himself, saying that his lawyers are present on scene and that two of his properties were being raided by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, and that he was cooperating with the investigators and that his lawyers were present and were cooperating with them. So this is a major situation here in Ukraine. Even before these raids, there was growing pressure on President Zelenskyy to fire his Chief of Staff, Andriy Yermak. This was coming from opposition parties. So the pressure on Zelenskyy now is going to be significantly increased, particularly if he continues to refuse to fire Andriy Yermak. And this is a situation that will continue to drag on as the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office and the National Anti-Corruption Bureau's investigation into the state-owned nuclear power agency Energoatom continues to grow and implicate more people, particularly those in Zelenskyy's inner circle. The question now is, will these two prosecutors' offices bring charges against Yermak, and how will Zelenskyy respond if charges are finally brought? Many opposition politicians here are now beginning to view Yermak's position as untenable. So it remains to be seen what will take place over the next few days. But certainly right here in Kyiv, the view is that pressure is significantly ramping up against Zelenskyy and his Chief of Staff, Yermak, in particular. It's Oz Kataji reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
Following the news that Ukraine's national investigation bureaus have launched a search into the head of the Ukrainian President's office, Andriy Yermak, TVP World brought in Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik from the country's Voice Party to get her immediate thoughts. Rudik's concerns focused on the implicit cost and broader impact of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy not suspending his chief of staff during the investigation process.
The timing for all of this is indeed suspicious, because we have heard about the investigations in the Energoatom corruption for a while right now. And these searches at the Office of President are also showing that President has missed a crucial moment to at least suspend his chief of staff for a time of the investigation. This is what we in Parliament were demanding last week and the week before that, because Ukraine cannot sacrifice our process of negotiation, cannot sacrifice the trust of our partners just because there are questions to the chief of president's office.
Anti-government protesters remained defiant on Thursday night ahead of the first anniversary of the ruling Georgian Dream Party's announcement it was halting talks on joining the European Union.
The move triggered waves of demonstrations across the country that have been met with mass arrests, police violence and a widening crackdown on dissent. Demonstrations have continued despite a concerted effort by the government to curb the movement through laws targeting protesters. After fines failed to quell the protests, new rules were introduced to punish participants who wore face masks or blocked roads by detaining them for up to 15 days. A number of opposition leaders have been jailed or are facing criminal charges, which opponents say are politically motivated. Critics say the crackdown mirrors laws enforced in Russia, where dissent has been stifled.
Expanding Poland's space endeavours has been high on the government's agenda for quite some time for the development of science, security and broader European cooperation. Now it appears that this vision may be closer to becoming a reality. Sonia Gatabishan has more on the story.
Will the European Space Agency open a center in Poland? That is now a realistic possibility. At this year's ministerial meeting of the European Space Agency, Poland and ESA signed a letter establishing intent to open a dedicated center in the country. It is expected that the establishment of such a center could provide benefits to both Poland and the wider European space sector.
Everything is affected by geopolitics right now. And of course, we do believe that it's important that this center will have also the dual-use technologies component. It's clear that we need to develop such technologies in Poland together with other member states.
It is huge for ESA as well, because this will be the first site, that technology site, that can be established or will be established in Central and Eastern Europe.
At this year's ESA Ministerial, ESA adopted a budget of over 22 billion euro, a considerable boost compared to the 16.9 billion euro adopted at the previous ESA Ministerial in 2022. Part of the reason for the increase of that budget is a new satellite imaging program called European Resilience from Space.
This new initiative on European resilience from space came from the requirements of the new geopolitical context and also from the fact that there are an increasing number of extreme weather events happening.
Russia's war in Ukraine was among the main factors to increase the region's strategic autonomy through the European Resilience from Space program. According to the Director General of the European Space Agency, Poland was one of the main advocates for the initiative.
Poland has really shown an interest to step forward on, and in particular also given maybe its geographic location and its investment through the NATO context on the defense side, to also utilize fully space for defense.
Among other news, European astronauts are expected to go to the moon. ESA DG announced that astronauts from Germany, France and Italy will participate in the Artemis missions to the moon, reflecting Europe's decisiveness to get back in the space race. From Bremen, for TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
That's all for World News. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more on TVP World. Goodbye.